I'm Adam Roberts. I'm a journalist with The Economist, and you may wonder why at a session on India and Sweden, why you've got an Englishman who lives in Paris here. It's a little bit odd, but it does make sense, honestly. For 5 years, I was based in Delhi. I was The Economist bureau chief covering India and the neighboring countries, and that was from 2010 to 2015. I now cover business in Europe, which includes Sweden, so I think I have a right to be here. I also have a little bit of a family connection to Sweden, so I claim a legitimacy to be here among you. We've got a session on reimagining or imagining India in 2030, and we've started that already with the Minister's excellent presentation previously. We've got until 3:30 this afternoon to keep on reimagining India. I'll just do a very quick opening imagining, and then I'm going to ask each of our panelists to say something, in effect, to introduce themselves with a short presentation, and then I hope we can open up to a little discussion between ourselves and, if we can with the microphones, include the room as well. That way you can't fall asleep, you have to stay awake to think of some questions to put to the table. Potential for India 2030, well, I think we know some of the big numbers. I mentioned one or two of them before. 1.7 billion people is the population of India when it peaks later this century. Already by the 2020s, India will be the most populous country on the planet. It'll be more populous than China. India remains very young. We know that. The demography of India is remarkable. Africa is similar, but other than Africa, India will have the youngest population on the planet as well as the largest. And these facts combine to being, a huge matter of potential. McKinsey, I think, has predicted, maybe many others have, that by 2030, India's economy will be the third largest in the world. It'll be certainly larger than Britain, Germany, France, Canada, Russia, should be larger than Japan as well. We know that the official statistics, if we trust them, in India say that already India's economy is the fastest growing large economy on the planet. And if we wrap in together all those great demographic opportunities, India should be able to sustain the sort of rapid growth, maybe not quite at the level that China has achieved in the last 2 or 3 decades, but something close to that. So that all comes together to be pretty much unique. There is nowhere else, potentially Africa if commodity prices are good, but really nowhere else that is as close to being a golden opportunity as India could be. But it doesn't happen automatically. Just because you have great potential doesn't mean you realize it. And what I want to kick off with very quickly, before we go into the more sort of focused presentations from each of the panelists, is a quick summary of where we've got to in the last 2 years. May 2014, we had the most earth-shaking election that India, I think, has seen since independence. I talked to people across the political spectrum about how significant that election was, and the hope, the expectation, the excitement about what could happen with a government that came into power promising Achhe Din, promising the good times, with a very large political mandate, and with a very clear project, and in Mr. Modi's case, a past in terms of economic policy that was very inspiring. We saw that Gujarat had developed rapidly, and if he could only take what he'd done in Gujarat and do it for India as a whole, there was a very clear path forward for being hopeful. So what's the sort of balance sheet 2 years in? I would have thought as a political analyst that you would do a lot of your big things in the first couple of years before the next election looms. So what has been done? Well, there is a good list of positive things that have been done in India in 2 years. I think India's opened up for foreign direct investment in sectors like insurance, defense, the railways. It's cracked down on inflation, it's cracked down on corruption, government is a bit more efficient, ease of doing business indicator is better than it was. But then again, it used to be terrible. It was 142nd in the world. It's got all the way up to 130-something. The goal is to get to the top 50, so there's a long, long way to go. What hasn't happened is also important, and I'm here as a skeptic, as a journalist, but I'm not actually here just to sort of promote India. I'm here to sort of analyze it. And I think some things haven't happened that I would have hoped would have happened by now. I would have liked to have seen the goods and services tax passed, because until you pass that, you don't have a single market in India for companies to work within. I would have liked to have seen labour reform at the national level, but there's been no attempt to do that. There's only been an effort to let certain states proceed with labour reform. I would have liked to have seen strategic privatizations. I would like to have seen a government that was ready to pull back from running the economy and to let others do it. So, in my view, it's a mixed story, actually. There's enormous potential, there's been progress, but there's a lot more to do. And so that's the context I wanted to frame this session in. And I don't mean to steer any of you to make big, bold judgments on those things too, but I thought it was important to put the context there before we just talk about all the amazing potential that there is, because it can be a bit trite just to talk about potential. There's enormous potential everywhere, but unless you start doing the difficult things to make the potential happen, it doesn't actually add up to anything. So in that opening, perhaps slightly skeptical start, we're going to now drill down and be more precise about certain areas of expertise. So I'm going to invite each of our 4 panelists. I'm sorry to say that one of our panelists has fallen ill, so we will not be joined by Ylva Berg. But could I ask Sushma to begin with a very brief introduction of who you are and what you'd like to talk about?